Hello, welcome to another My Virtual Jericho, each and every Wednesday at 5:30 on YouTube. Today, the issue has divided the community or united the community, depending on how you view it. It's very contentious. It's about the low traffic neighbourhood. It's been 18 months of discussion going on. It's been a serendipity of closure due to sinkholes led to plans for a low traffic neighbourhood. Some of those are real, some are just real. So we've gone from the nightmare of rat running to the supposed utopia of pedestrianisation. Tonight we're looking in detail at 3 of the 4 currently plans in the ring. The LTN group headed by Jamie Hartzell, the new Save Jericho LTN group, which is in South Jericho, and my own very little modest proposal. It'll be cool and rational explanation. Much heat and little light has come out so far in this debate. The public service tonight will be to provide a calm home for discussion. Let that begin. First to dispatch about Christian Wilmar, one of the great modern transport journalists. Formerly Independent, The Guardian, he's since written 19 books, yes, 19, mainly on railways. He tells me that I kicked off his book writing career back in 1999 by getting him to write a book about Stagecoach, the bus company. Him and I are both obsessed with them and their predatory behaviour, alleged, and in the past, we better say for lawyers reasons. Fresh off the press from Christian is this book, Cathedrals of Steam. Very good book, very good read it is too. At London Termini. It's a brilliant read. If you want to buy a copy reduced and signed by him, send me an email and I'll put you in touch. So since our obsession with Stagecoach, 20 odd years ago, we've been friends. Christian's actually been to Jericho. He came to my party. So Christian, you've read the LTN Group Consultants report and their proposals. What do you make of it?
Well, it's an impressive report, and it looks at all the aspects. And having been to Jericho, I thought that was very helpful in helping me to give a little talk about this. Let me just put a little bit of historic perspective, because I think that's very important. What are we talking about here? What is all this about, and why is there so much fuss across the country? I wrote a piece for Labour List magazine website, which is the Labour Party's website, saying that LTNs are the biggest transport controversy in the country, bigger than HS2, bigger than building new motorways or whatever. What is all this fuss about? And I suppose that the reason is there's a bit of a culture clash going on here between people who favour their cars, see their cars as their lifeline, maybe their basic form of income, and other people who very much see cars as something of the enemy. And I think we have to take a sensible, pragmatic view through this. And I think the ideas, or some of the ideas for the low traffic neighbourhood in Jericho do precisely that. So what should be the starting point? What should be the thinking behind it? Now, there's both a short-term and local thinking, and there's a long-term thinking. And I think people are more won over actually by the short-term and the local kind of thinking. And what's that about? That is about creating a neighborhood, creating somewhere where people want to live. And there was research kind of 40, 50 years ago in San Francisco, which showed that the more traffic you get on a road, the less people have a sense of community. And they measured this by looking at how many people knew other people in the streets in which they lived in. And they found there was an exact correlation that in very little traffic streets, most people knew each other. In medium traffic streets, some people knew each other and there were some connections. And in really heavily used streets, nobody knew each other. I mean, I can testify to this personally. I'm looking out of my window just here at something that was created as an LTN before the words were ever used. But basically, my street is next to a main road, Parkhurst Road, Camden Road, if you want, behind Holloway Prison in London. It's next to it. And it would be a shortcut through to Tufnell Park if this road was not blocked off, but it's blocked off. And so I sit here in my office, and in a day, I might see 15 or 20 cars. And as a result, I know all my neighbours. I know lots of people around here. I have a look at kind of people wandering by. They walk in the middle of the street. They kind of reclaim the street. So would this be possible in Jericho? Would it be possible on Walton Street in particular, but also the streets running off it? And my argument would be yes. Yes, this is possible. Yes, you can create a different sort of culture with the right sort of blocking off, with the right kind of still ensuring that people have access. A lot of this fuss about, you're completely blocking off the street, I can't get there. That just doesn't happen. Yes, sometimes it takes longer to get to a particular point, but nobody is totally blocked off. Everybody is connected to the road network in some way or another. So that's one of the fear factors. But this is about creating really a new way of life. And again, a bit of history here. I mean, cars have not always run along roads. It's only about 120, 130 years that we've had lots of cars. And gradually cars were allowed to dominate the scene far too much. And I won't take you through the history, you can read that in my books, but most recently, one of the things that has happened, and this is clearly happening in Walton Street, is that the sat-navs and TomTom and all that recommend getting around traffic jams. And clearly, if there's a bit of a traffic jam in your parallel main roads, Woodstock Road or whatever, they'll send people down the other streets, which look as if they're feasible to go through. And of course, they haven't since the roadworks and the barrier, but they would have done before. And so that would create far more traffic than there ever was. So this is not about a return to a normal. This is about creating a new type of street, because the normal would have been 10, 20 years ago when there were some cars going along it, but nothing like the cars going along now. What we have to do is actually create a new normal in which there are even fewer cars than there were 10 or 20 years ago, so that we can then really have an environment which is safe, less polluted. And this is not about cycling. It's always positive that it's all about cycling. Of course, cyclists are one of the beneficiaries, but it's about people walking. In Waltham Forest, where they've had a series of these low traffic neighborhoods, they've found that people actually walk more. And that has been actually a bigger effect than the effect on cycling. So what about the negatives? One of the concerns always is from shopkeepers and the like, and restaurant owners or whatever, that people can't get access to their shops. But in effect, when these schemes are looked at years later at the effect, for the most part, nearly always, the streets that have been blocked off, the streets have been made more friendly, the streets have been made more accessible, more pleasant to live in, have benefited. And there has been greater footfall and not less. Now, most people who use these facilities, particularly the shops, will be local, will be able to reach them without cars. We're not talking here of major high streets. We're talking about a residential area with a small shopping centre with some restaurants and pubs and whatever in the middle of it. It's completely different than a major high street, where obviously you do need some parking. But you don't need people to be able to park outside the shop to be able to kind of use it in this sort of environment. And so what I would say is, looking at this scheme is, give it a proper go. Remember that, if you've got figures about usage of shops over the last 9 months, a year, these are very skewed by the pandemic. These are really exceptional circumstances. So I think don't rush into the idea that, if we open this barrier up again and we return things to normal, it's all going to be all right. It's not. And the sat-nav warriors are going to be back on their cars, driving through at 30 miles an hour through an area that really can't cope with that sort of usage. So, to sum up, I think you can win people over mainly with the local arguments that this is going to be beneficial for the area, it's going to be beneficial for the shops, it's going to be beneficial for local school children, for cyclists, for walkers, whatever. There are longer term arguments. This is a wider part of history, but it's not one that I think necessarily wins people over. Yes, this is important for climate change to deter people using their cars, encouraging them not to. Yes, it's important to reduce emissions as much as possible. Yes, we want to get pollution for the whole city down, not just for this street. But I don't think that's the argument that wins people over. I think the argument that this issue needs to be fought over is the impact on local people, on local schools, on local amenities, and on people making short journeys around the area. I hope that's helpful.
Good question. We have a low traffic neighbourhood already.
Yeah.
The barrier. Should we not keep the barrier?
Sorry, that's a question to me.
We have a low traffic neighbourhood already.
Yeah.
With the barrier.
Yes. No, of course you should keep the barrier. Yeah. No, of course you should keep the barrier. You know, I mean, the example again is my street. You know, if we open the barrier up at the end of my street, we would get, you know, maybe 50, 60 cars an hour going through it rather than 10 cars, 20 cars a day. I mean, it just would be intolerable. You know, if you open up that barrier now, you know, given that people are less using public transport, you know, they're worried about using it, there's more cars on the road, you'll get even more cars dodging Woodstock Road to take a shortcut. So lifting the barrier would be a disaster.
So leave the barrier where it is, or move it down. Well,
and that the detail I can't get into, John. You know, I don't know the area well enough.
But pedestrianisation, Christian, is that a vital?
Well, I think we had a talk about this earlier, and I thought about that and looked at it. In Waltham Forest, what they've done is they haven't entirely pedestrianised little shopping areas like that. What they've done is made them very friendly and accessible, and put some trees up and put some benches up, but they will allow, they've just discouraged the traffic, right? So that really this is a space that is more for people and cyclists and shoppers rather than for cars. And they've taken out most of the parking places, leaving kind of one or two for people with disabilities and the like. And I think that's a compromise that works. I think if you totally pedestrianise it, you don't allow any access at all, that is both controversial and maybe counterproductive. But what you do, and I understand there's money problems here, but if you can create a nice environment that doesn't look like just a boring kind of street, pavement there, but maybe zigzags a bit and maybe kind of, you know, has a few plants and a few benches and whatever, I think that's the best compromise. But it does need a bit of money. You might have to raise it.
£52,000 won't get you very far, will it, on that?
Well, you know, you can do a bit with that. I mean, here's another point, is that maybe you have to kind of start simple and build it up from there. And once you've done the basic kind of barriers and planters in the middle of the road or whatever, you then build it up from there and get more money to improve the environment as you go on. You know, what I don't think you want is to open up the barriers and let the cars all back again.
Now, Nigel Farage, that well-known social philosopher, says you're all loony lefties in the cycle lanes.
Look, this is crazy. This is crazy, John. You know, this should not be a political issue. This is not about politics. This will drive me absolutely mad, as you can hear from the tone of my voice. You know, this is not kind of in Europe, which we're still allowed to speak of despite Brexit. You know, in Europe, these are not political issues. They're kind of issues about the environment, about kind of maybe economics or whatever, but there's not this right-left split, and I just don't buy it. You know, I just don't buy that, you know, oh, everybody who wants a better environment is on the left and everybody who wants to drive their cars is on their right. We are all car drivers as well as, you know, even me, a mad cyclist, I drive my car sometimes. You know, I don't see myself as a cyclist. I'm a person who cycles. I'm a person who drives, a person who walks. And I think we have to really kind of get away from, it's the Daily Mail on one side and the Guardian on the other. I think we're all in this together. We all want to create a better world, a better place for our kids and for our residents, and make sure that our shops can prosper. And we should just forget of the political divide behind it.
Now, you used to be Mayor of London, or you wanted to be Mayor of London. You also wanted to be MP for Richmond as well. If you were the star of Jericho, what would you do? What was your solution?
Plastic and paint is my idea out of that, which is that you experiment and you try various things. And you to some extent this has happened with COVID and some cycle lanes and whatever. Is you try it out. So you put you block somewhere off for a couple of weeks, and you put some parking places or somewhere else, or you block some off, or you play around with it. You might kind of make one street one way for a bit and whatever, and you kind of see how it works. And you try and win over people in that way. And so if somebody doesn't like something and they have a good reason for, rather than just I don't like it, which is often the reaction, then you amend it. And so you play around as you are on paper at the moment, but I would like to see that played around in reality with cones and plastic and whatever.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's a good tour of the horizon. If we can move on, I don't think Nick Helen has showed yet, has he? Not like I can see him anywhere. Thanks, Christian.
I have to leave now, I'm afraid, for another meeting. So thank you very much.
Get on your bike and see you at my next.
I'm getting on my bike now.
All right, goodbye. All right, Robert Freshwater, your job is to help the Jericho LTN into being. You are the midwife of it. You're the Oxfordshire County Council official charged with making the scheme happen. Where are we at on it?
Thank you, John, and thank you for having me along this evening. It's very interesting listening to Christian. Actually, I think from the county council's perspective, and I'll talk on where we're at and provide an update in a second. But I think a lot of the points he was making now are very salient and very pertinent to why ourselves as a county council have sought to look at bringing these measures to Oxfordshire. It touches on a lot of the points, and it is more so than just the cars or the cycles per se. It is more so about the place. So I thought that was quite helpful. So just where is the county council at then? What is the current proposals? Well, just to take stock and to go backwards, as a lot of people in Jericho will know, we've got the ETRO barrier at the bottom of Walton Street, which was put in at the end of when it was put in during the summer of 2019, and then an ETRO to extend it was put in November 2019 to last for 18 months, really to trial the effects to see how that worked for the area in terms of reducing issues like rat running, improving priority for pedcycles through the area, for example. And we've done a lot of learning during the past 12 plus months or so about that. So some bits have worked well, and we appreciate there is still some learning in other areas. So a lot of the tweaks and stuff that Christian was talking about, we have been looking at those to try and mitigate some of the effects on people which are well known in the local area. So that's brought us back to from the last while. More recently, of course, COVID has come forward, and the whole idea of low traffic neighbourhoods has really taken off more generally around the country, and ourselves as well in Oxfordshire are looking towards that really as part of the COVID recovery side of things as well. So the county council, along with loads of other authorities across the country, put in a bid to government earlier this year. We found out in early November we were awarded 2.98 million to implement a range of active travel measures across the city of Oxford. So what does that mean? That is, essentially a package of LTN measures and other measures across the city we'll be looking to bring forward. For Jericho and Walton Manor, it does mean that now there is some funding and some resource from the county to really look more holistically at the area in terms of bringing forward an LTN, which I think we appreciate is in the county council is how we want the area to come forward, rather than looking at an individual barrier in isolation. It's more about how we plan for the wider area there. So we have got that money. I say we've got that money. There is still some negotiations with government. This is still quite fresh news to a certain respect there. So it still actually doesn't sit in our bank, so to speak, and we need to work that through. But there is now a timetable broadly towards we can look to start bringing an LTN.
Help us out those two things. How much money and what's the timetable?
Sorry, money for Jericho specifically.
Yeah.
So just for context, in the bid we put forward proposal for about 53,000 to develop an LTN for Jericho. I should say that is somewhat caveated. There are discussions around how that might move around, but that's roughly the ballpark we're looking at there. And sorry, John, you have a question there?
It was timetables. You mentioned timetables.
So from DFT's perspective, what they want us to deliver is to be starting consultation with areas by the end of the financial year, with a view to all these emergency travel schemes being delivered by the end of 2021-22. What I would say clearly for the Jericho area is that it is perhaps a slight different discussion to other areas, because there is the existing barrier, which will be the ETRO will be running out towards the middle end of May 2021. So I think in all practical likelihood, we will be wanting to develop and implement a low traffic neighbourhood idea with the community well in advance of that April 2022 deadline, really to try and see how best we can coincide it with that current barrier closure effectively.
Just talk politics a minute. The politicians go to election in May. From March, they're not allowed. They're in Caperda. So effectively, you've got to make decisions by March, haven't you?
Yeah, we're aware of that. It is a challenging timetable. It is something we're working through. We will be looking to engage more publicly on this in the new year, and certainly, it is very challenging. But the DFT being very clear to us that consultation and engagement with local communities is important here, and we want to do this right. So we want to get off on the right process and footing on this, and we will be in touch with people in the new year on that and how we go through that locally. What
form will the consultation take? Do you have any idea yet?
I mean, that is being worked on, and exactly. I think what is important, as I say, there's a number of measures across the whole city we're looking at, and it is important, while we respect the local local context and what might work locally in one way and might not work in another area. We do need to bring this together under a wider banner, and I think it is salient here, John, just to say what we're looking at here in Jericho and Walton Manor isn't in isolation to what we're looking at across the wider city. The county council's got a wider package of measures, which a number of those listening will be familiar with, connecting Oxford, the zero emission zone. This is just one component, I guess, in many ways, as part of that wider package of stuff we are looking to bring forward. So it needs to sort of be planned and coordinated in that context, really, because Jericho doesn't sit in isolation. I think we would say from the wider city, and we do need to look at that context and
Jericho is an island. Do you have a preferred scheme so far?
In complete honesty, we do not have any preferred scheme. We are taking on board lots of suggestions of what people want to have on board, and we'll be considering those very, very carefully and engaging people in the new year on those. But no, we're very happy to receive people's ideas, and we can circulate the email address. I mean, I'll give it here, to be honest. If people are happy, if people want to submit ideas to active travel oxfordcity.org.uk, at oxfordshire.gov.uk. Very happy to receive those, John. I know we received your thoughts and numbers of others as well. So yeah,
we'll put that in feedback. So what message have you got for Jericho for Christmas and the LTN then? Is there a message from the county council?
Well, I think it very much is that we good news, we do have this funding, and we will be in touch in due course with everyone about trying to find a solution here, which is I think importantly equitable and works for the whole community, not just particular sections. I think we do appreciate and do understand to a certain extent this issue has been to a certain extent divisive in some areas. So we do look forward to working with you all in the new year on what that might look like.
Okay, thank you. Please do stick around. I see that Nick Helen has now turned up. Nick, are you there and in that street in Walthamstow? Can we see you? This is Nick Helen, who's the transport editor of the Sunday Times and who's written extensively about LTN, particularly in London. Do switch your camera off, please, Robert, as well. Nick, can you hear us? Tell us, what's your view on LTNs in general? You're on mute, by the way. You're on mute. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Should we give you a chance to unmute yourself? There we are. Right. Nick, what's your view on LTNs in general from the work you've done?
So I think one of the people listening in, who's an excellent fellow called Adam Kaufman, who works on the APPG for cycling, he hears me. We have little chin wags where we rant about all this, and I always tell him that he should learn from the experience I had from dealing with transgender wars, because they make your rows look like nothing because they're so polarized. And the lesson you learn eventually is it's better to lose the argument and win the sale than just to keep bashing on, because you're not going to beat the other side. And you've seen it where I live in Wandsworth. A whole bunch of LTNs have been abandoned. We're familiar with the Battle of Kensington High Street. The other side are not going to give in, and you see, by annoying them, all you have is stoke up people like Nigel Farage to make a political issue. So what I said to John, and he thought I could put up this argument, was to say that the people who support LTN should just be a bit more honest about it. They are anti-car. Doesn't mean you don't want any cars, but you do want to have fewer cars. You do want to persuade people not to use them for short journeys. That is inescapable. And if you try and sneak up on people, they'll just resent it because they know what you're about. And what I would argue is that the much more constructive way is to check out, are you in an area where people have got alternatives and where the mood is swinging that way? And we did do a piece in the paper recently where we got hold, thanks to, in fact, somebody in Oxford, some DVLA data, which showed that about a third of the country has actually been moving towards lower car ownership over the past decade. And that's pretty significant. That's not a few places like Camden and Jericho. That's across the whole country. And I think you should, forgive me, I don't know what the position is on the ground in Jericho, but do your basic research and you can tell pretty quickly if the tide's moving that way or not. And it strikes me that a lot of the opposition is because people have slapped LTNs into areas where car ownership is still rising and people are dependent. Now, it's a bit like, say, trying to promote veganism. You don't do that in the middle of beef country. You start somewhere else and you try and carry people with you. And I thought I might just I might try and just give you some thoughts on the sort of arguments you can deploy. And I'll be brief now because it's difficult to tell, since I can't see if I'm taking it with you or not. But I think you can be persuasive if you tell people, if you show people that they're not just defending the status quo, actually the status quo has changed. Because of sat-navs, residential streets have become a hell of a lot busier. In London, they've become 70% busier in the last 10 years. In parts of Yorkshire, they're about 45% busier. And that's because sat-navs, when the voice says, take the second exit, it doesn't distinguish between an A road, a B road, or a little neighbourhood road. And so traffic has gone up a lot. So when people dig their heels in and say that you're all trying to do social engineering, actually, supporters of the LTN should say, well, you know what? Imperceptibly, things have changed here as well. So get people to look at some of the benefits. When I was, yes, there was a little gag about Walthamstow or whatever. I did a piece about Walthamstow because I thought, let's look at an area which has had LTNs for a number of years. And there's a particular outer borough of London called Waltham Forest, which has indeed had that. And they went through all the painful stages where they had the demos. The guy in charge of it was confronted with a whole bunch of protesters carrying a coffin down the street, supposedly signalling the demise of the high street. 5 years on, there are still some pockets of resistance, but essentially, from the basis of me looking around there, it seems to me that it's got quite a lot of consensus. And then you can start selling some of the benefits. Then you can start saying, whatever pushes somebody's buttons, whether it's street cafes, whether it's house prices going up, you just work with what you've got. But I think we live in an era of identity politics and anger, and it isn't just on social media. And you just have to think that the main argument I give you is, if you want this to succeed, you're going to have to carry people with you, because it's very easy to sabotage, and you have to think very hard about whether you want Jericho to become the next flashpoint in the battleground, because there are plenty of people who want to oppose you. I think that's enough for now, but John, if you want to ask something too.
A couple of quick questions from me.
Yes, boss.
Waltham Forest cost 45 million, didn't it, all told?
I think it costs roughly that over a number of years, yes.
It's
a lot of money. And I think there are cheaper ways. I think we've seen, I wouldn't claim particular authority here, but I think as we've seen with the impact of a few planters, I don't think you have to go the full Dutch roundabout for this to succeed.
We've got £52,000 in Jericho. What can we do for that?
I think you can. The nice answer is you'd be amazed at how far you can get with a few blocked off streets and a few planters. I ought to know, but I don't know whether the revenue raised from fines can be ploughed back in, because I suspect that there's a lot of money accruing from people preaching this, but that's not the way I'd urge you to go. I think if you do it with consensus, I think they always say good neighbor, strong borders make for good neighbors or whatever. I think I'd almost flip it around. If you keep good neighbors, you don't need very strong borders.
My last question, I hate to go all Nigel Farage on you, but he says the LTN people are all loony lefty cyclists. How do you react to that?
Sadly, some of the people who have promoted this are quite zealous. And, hi, Adam, I'd say don't try and tell people what's good for them. Try and bring them with you by actually seeing what they would value. If they're a white van driver who can only see that their shortcut has been blocked off, you're not going to get very far. If they believe that their own residential area might benefit from some of this in the future, then you're onto something.
Okay.
If I might say so, if you have people like you, John, promoting it, or families with kids, that goes a long way. Whereas if it's somebody who's whip it thin in Lycra, then it's game over. You're not going to win.
Thank you very much for that, for that, Nick. But stick around, please, and come to Jericho and write about us, please.
I'd love to. I'm on my summer holiday. I'm on my winter holidays, so I'll say goodbye. But good luck with your session.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to. There's a new group in town called Save LTN Jericho, or Save Jericho LTN. They're people from South Jericho. They've been the mouse has actually finally arisen after a year or so, and they're starting to make a noise. Chris Garland, what are you standing for? The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, John, and thanks for the opportunity of outlining our thoughts. Well, I'm sort of one of a small number of local residents in Jericho who are very much for a low traffic neighbourhood, but are alarmed at what we see as, and to coin a sort of horrible phrase, the direction of travel. So what I'd like to do briefly is to outline really 2 points tonight. First of these is the current position as we see it with regard to the ongoing lobbying for a low traffic neighbourhood in Jericho. And the second is to just give you some comments on what a possible longer term view may be. And so to start off with, I mean, I think I imagine it's quite fair to say that many of us are probably guilty of not really engaging as much as perhaps we should have done with the discussions that have been ongoing since Walton Street was closed last summer. For those of us living on Walton Street, of course, there have been lots of benefits. The rat running and daily queues of stationary traffic outside our houses, for a start, have gone, as well as the coaches full of tourists, often driving in part up the pavement outside our houses. Those have gone. So the road's much safer, it's quieter, and the air quality in the area has improved dramatically. But I think, you know, this is a street. Walton Street is a street, and I imagine not many of us expected the closure to last forever. Apart from anything else, of course, we're only a small part of the local community, and the positives that have come with the barrier at the end of the street have also come with some negatives, some unanticipated negativity. And, you know, in particular, I would highlight there's been concerns raised by our local traders, who, of course, we appreciate so highly and are sort of central to our community, and we want to support them. And also problems to overcome around access for some of our residents, particularly those with disabilities. But I'm sure that many of us share the hope, or at least the expectation, that any reopening will be implemented in a thoughtful way, in a way that will capture as many of the benefits that I've sort of highlighted as are possible to retain. So why are we starting a small group called Save Jericho? Well, a number of us are extremely alarmed to discover recently that the group formerly known as Don't Choke Jericho, which is now rebranded as the Jericho Walton Manor Low Traffic Neighbourhood, is lobbying strongly to reopen Walton Street at the junction with Beaumont Street, and to reopen it in a way that will create an environment for Jericho that could be even worse than before the closure, in our view. And this, I mean, the bizarre side of this, of course, is that this is a complete turnaround for Don't Choke Jericho, which was established, you'll remember, John, as a group that strongly supported the temporary barrier on Walton Street. Well, so what is it about their plans that alarms us so much? So the proposed Jericho and Walton Manor low traffic neighbourhood is based on and derived from a civil engineers report that the group commissioned. And the report, I mean, it doesn't make for light reading. The report contains some quite detailed and predictive modelling, including predicting what would follow the reopening of the south end of Walton Street once their low traffic neighbourhood was put in place. And here I can quote verbatim the report, and it says, somewhere in the region of 2,000 to 4,000 vehicles per day are likely to be exiting the area via the south end of Walton Street, with 2,000 to 4,000 vehicles entering the area, split between Little Clarendon Street and Walton Street. So upwards towards 8,000 traffic movements a day, which unfortunately we don't have data on what we were experiencing before the closure, but that seems a very large amount of traffic movement. And of course, this will result in a constant flow of traffic up and down Walton Street, simply reverting to what it was before the barrier was installed, and possibly worse. And I'd suggest that one inevitable consequence of this is that there will be a marked increase in the traffic using the side streets of Jericho as well, which is a concern across our community. So our concern is that the reality of the Jericho and Walton Manor low traffic neighbourhood is not widely understood. And we feel that there are a great number of people, which we would include ourselves in, who will be and are being dismayed when the reality of what's being suggested sinks in. The extensive social media campaign mounted by Jericho and Walton Manor low traffic neighbourhood has, we think, obscured a number of the very significant downsides, and also wrongly created the impression that their proposal is a done deal, that this is what the council's going to take.
Well, we know that's not true, obviously, now.
Well, okay, but that's certainly a perception of some people. And it's precisely because of these concerns taken together that we formed the Save Jericho Low Traffic Neighbourhood Group. There's a focus for those of us who are increasingly concerned by what could become a huge step back for all of us.
Just to move you along a bit, you've got a colleague, Hauke. If you'd like to switch your video and audio on, do you want to add to anything that Chris has said?
No, I think as for what he presented, I guess this is pretty much what we stand for. I mean, I could probably add that just to say that we have kind of a low traffic neighborhood solution in place right now, which is not perfect. I agree, and I think we all agree, but it's a very, very good starting point, and it can certainly be improved in the future. And it's kind of difficult to understand why you would go for a completely different, obviously quite expensive scheme that will likely have the predicted consequences, but potentially also a lot of other unpredicted consequences that will lead to the next kind of level of what we do next to get this done. And maybe the last thing is, sorry.
The two of you, sorry to move you along.
Yeah.
So you sound to me as though if there's pedestrianisation, you're dreading in the future. You're going to have you're going to be back to what you were before.
Well, we don't think that pedestrianisation is going to solve the problem. I mean, I think if you talk to the local traders, they're concerned they're being compared with suburbs in London, which were completely different, were busy high streets and were wider streets to start off with. So I think my impression anyway is that the local traders are very anti pedestrianisation of the central part of Walton Street.
I think 77% of them, according to their own survey. One quick question. A question for somebody who said, why are you using the Save Jericho slogan? It's a slogan which the traders use. Please change your name.
Well, I guess probably we're not up on the history. As I said at the start, we perhaps should have been more engaged from the beginning. It's only coming to this later on. Perhaps we should do that.
Why has the mouse suddenly roared? Why has the South Jericho mouse suddenly decided to roar?
Well, I think because of the reasons that I've just gone through, we don't want to end up worse off than we were beforehand.
Okay, just moving on if you can. Now, I've got a very modest scheme. I don't know if Phil could perhaps offer the PowerPoint for my little scheme. We have a low traffic neighbourhood. Do switch yourselves off, please, gents. What I would do is I'd keep the barrier in some shape or form. I don't know if you can see, keep that barrier with an AMPR somewhere to make sure we get rid of the rat runners. Rat runners are the big problem. So you need some sort of a barrier there. And then moving along, no left turn out of Little Clarendon Street, lots and lots of traffic calming as we go along Walton Street, widened pavements, no right turn into St Bernard's Road. You could probably do that for 50, 60, 70,000 pounds. It's not going to cost 600,000. So you don't need pedestrianisation, don't need any modal filters. It's very, very simple. As so often, the simplest answer is the best. But let's go on to the low traffic neighbourhood group, who now style themselves the Jericho low traffic neighbourhood group. Now they'd be very noisy. You've got pockets deep enough to commission a £4,000 report. Jamie, what's your answer to some of the criticisms so far, particularly from the last group?
Well, I think it's very interesting what Christian was saying. I recognise that he very much values the report, and our intention in producing that report was to get some expert opinion rather than just amateurs casting their views about how traffic should work in the area. And I think Christian was recognising that we've done that. And if you read that report, which is pretty lengthy, you'll see that it covers quite a wide range of different options. So it's not just promoting one particular solution. I mean, as a group, we have a view on the best solution, but it's promoting a wide solution. And one point I would take up with Christian, though, was that he's wrong to say that there is no pedestrianisation in Walthamstow. Orford Road is closed to traffic except for the bus between 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And that's 150, 160 metre strip of Orford Road, which is pedestrianised, which is exactly the same length as the strip of pedestrianisation that we're proposing in Walton Street. So they're very similar schemes. Though not nearly as extensive in terms of what's being done across the whole neighbourhood, hence the much lower cost. But I mean, where I do agree with him, which less traffic means more community. And if we reduce the traffic in Walton Manor, the huge priority is to eliminate the through traffic. And every scheme, and including our scheme, will be doing that. So in no sense is there a return to the nightmare that we're seeing we saw previously at the lower end of Walton Street. In fact, no sense will there be a continuation of the nightmare we're currently seeing in St Bernard's Road, because we're talking about removing all through traffic. So, and that's the essence of the scheme. You know, the element of it is how to manage the people in Jericho, such as your good self, John, who do drive in and out of the area. And what we're doing effectively is creating two low traffic neighbourhoods. One to the north in Walton Manor and one to the south in Jericho. So Walton Manor will deal with its own traffic. That's sort of half of the households who were driving down through that area will no longer be doing so, because there'll be a restricted access camera on that route. And
Jamie, if I can just have a little word. I've read the report, and it actually says, it states, poor pedestrianisation is not considered to be a preferred option at this stage. So why are you trying to impose this on the neighbourhood? That's a question from David Wyatt.
Yeah, well, so I mean, the report has put forward pedestrianisation as one option, but it's suggesting a simpler option, which is a modal filter outside which is basically a barrier, physical barrier outside the Walton Street bike shop. I mean, that's a view. You know, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to the council to decide what it is they would like to do. They own the roads, they decide the schemes, it's their money. But we feel a restricted access camera is a very viable and affordable option, and it has the great advantage that you can choose who can pass through that camera. So particularly the emergency vehicles obviously will need to pass through. You know, there will be no physical barrier preventing emergency vehicles. There will be no physical barrier preventing a bus travelling through the area, because the camera there will just find anyone who drives through who shouldn't drive through. So
will you move the barrier that's currently there at Beaumont Street? Will that be moved and be replaced by an ANPR camera or what?
No, I mean, we don't really need to get stuck in the details of the scheme, but the scheme is basically to replace the barrier that's currently there with barriers further north, so that it splits the traffic more equitably between north and south. You know, it's lovely for Chris to say how wonderful it is they have no traffic at all, but a lot of people in that area would say, well, we could take a share of the traffic, it just needs to be a reasonable share, and that's the kind of scheme that we're designing. And in fact, we're in discussion with a number of residents in that area about how to make that work. You know, it's a shame, I think, that Chris spent most of his time discrediting somebody else's scheme rather than trying to propose his own. I think, you know, what our message to them, and it is already happening with other residents of that street, is that we want to be in dialogue with them and work out what's the best scheme that works for everyone. And that's based on first removing through traffic and then distributing remaining traffic, those of us in Jericho and Walton Manor who choose to drive between the remaining streets. I'd like to make sure that Will has a word. Can I just go to Will and say what's...
Yeah, Will. No, but how are you going to get from 52,000 to 670,000, which is what your scheme costs? Will.
So I mean, before I turn to the money question, I'll just reiterate something that Jamie has intimated towards, and I think has come out in the discussion thus far, which is why I was most interested in taking up your invitation this evening, John, is that there's a lot more unity and common ground here than perhaps the debate has been presented by different parties to it. And, you know, we share so many of the interests with Chris and the other people on South Walton Street, and we have some other residents of that part of the neighbourhood within our group. You know, we have traders who who are actively involved with us in terms of internal discussions and who are very supportive of full implementation of of our preferred scheme. That's not to say that there aren't traders who have legitimate concerns and disagreements. Of course there are, just as there are residents who have different views on how this should move forward. But I'm really uncomfortable, and I know a lot of other people who are involved in this with the presentation of some of these different proposals as diametrically opposed, because I think we all have so much more common ground in investing in the neighbourhood than that. So to the money, John.
Yeah,
you attended our AGM just recently, and fully appreciate that the proposals that we've put forward, the more limited option we have implementable with the money that is available. Scheme C, as we proposed it in our position statement, which is openly available for the simple modal filter option on Walton Street, is achievable with the money available. And we see that as a step towards a full implementation of pedestrianisation. Additionally to that, the suggestions that others are proposing as well, John, we should be careful to cost. We've presented roughly costed solutions where very few other people can say that is the case. So chicanes and cycle lanes, if they're properly implemented, are also quite expensive. So we need to look at both sides of this.
I know you've got a spiel, but sorry to come over all rubbing day with you. But you're a student at Somerville or at Green Templeton, correct?
At Green Templeton, John.
Yeah. So I mean, to quote Robin Day, you're here today, gone tomorrow. What's it got to do with you?
This has everything to do with me, John. For a start, I'm a resident on Observatory Street. I am a student, but I'm fully a resident of the area, and more than that, the student population in the neighbourhood is huge in terms of its share of the resident population, and there's also a significant amount of footfall through the business and local community. That's not to say that those interests trump anybody else's. It's just to say that we're also a legitimate stakeholder in the local community. And to suggest that because people aren't here for 20, 30, 40 years is not a particularly constructive way of engaging with those people who, in some cases, are here for a single year. In my case, are here for a few years, and in other cases, are here for 4 or 5 years.
Jamie, you're historical enough to remember the Cuttersware Wall in North Oxford, which divided a working class from a middle class community and took 30 years to get rid of. You're just building a tarmac version of that, aren't you?
Well, first, I'd just like to support Will's point about students having a very much of a right to speak in this. You know, judging by the other members of this panel who are all over 50 white blokes, you know, I think there could be a bit more diversity in this discussion, and I'd certainly like to see more women in future panels and discussions. I mean, the Cuttersware Wall is just a completely childish and ridiculous comparison, to be quite honest. I mean, you're talking about a physical wall like the wall across Jerusalem or across Berlin that completely divided 2 communities. We're talking about something that's actually going to connect communities here. You know, all you're talking about is a restricted access camera that prevents not people and who have conversations and are walking down streets, or cyclists or people in wheelchairs. You're facilitating their ability to move between the 2 areas. What you're doing is you're stopping someone like your good self from driving from Jericho to Walton Manor, or Walton Manor to and out again. And why is that? Does that help build community to have lots of cars driving? If we, you know, encourage lots of cars to drive down Nelson Street where you live, John, I think you'd be quite happy to see a filter that stopped the cars and allowed.
I love my low traffic neighbourhood in Nelson Street. But
exactly.
what you do
if we block the streets, then people can come out and play in the streets. You know, schemes like Playing Out, where children can play out in the street after school, or people can spend time talking, not drowning in car fumes and noise.
You're
creating a little restriction on lorries and cars to drive through the top of Walton Street is not comparable to a physical wall that divides a community. It's a childish comparison, to be quite frank.
I don't think so. You're creating 2 distinct communities. Now let's move on to financing. So, somewhere you were saying you're going to get lots of money out of the humanities building from the community levy. Is there any evidence of that whatsoever?
Well, no, I mean, the point about our proposals is that you can quite easily do the scheme. Well, restricted access cameras, you know, I mean, I'm sure if Rob was here, he would tell you they're not entirely straightforward, because although they can be reasonably cheap to establish, you know, a camera would cost about 25,000, whereas the proposals of chicanes and things that Jericho Connections or yourself are proposing would probably cost more. if there was a reasonable number of them, which is what you're proposing, given the design standards these days. So that is quite an affordable solution. The expensive part of the scheme is if you're going to re-landscape the entire street. Now, that obviously is going to make it a much more attractive area, more of a destination area. It's what a lot of the traders would want on that street. And you were saying how 75% of the traders are opposed.
77, I think, is their number, but
but that's an entirely made-up figure by Jericho Traders Association. You were on our AGM, and you would have heard a number of traders coming forward saying how much they supported this scheme, such as John Ells at Mamma Mia, or
3 or 4 traders does not make a summer, Jamie.
Sorry.
3 or 4 swallow traders does not make a summer. I think.
Oh no, but I mean there are many more. I mean, I could list you 10 traders who support the scheme, and we're doing some work on that. So you'll hear more about that in the future. But okay. I mean, what they want to see is they want to see proper investment in the area. But if I can just share my screen briefly with you, I think actually a lot can be done on low funds. If you can see that, this is a common thing to do in Europe, or this is in the States.
Okay.
For quite low cost, you can actually reclaim some of the street space and create some real great dining space. And who would not want that? With restricted and reduced or eliminated traffic, so all you've got going by is pedestrians and cyclists. That is a beautiful space to eat in. We're all eating outside much more these days because of the COVID epidemic, and we're getting used to that idea. This is very low cost and affordable to reclaim the street, and it's just free table space for those restaurants. It's a great boost to those businesses who are really, really, really struggling at the current time with all the COVID restrictions. This kind of outside space could make a difference between bankruptcy and survival for those.
As I understand, there's only sort of one or 2 restaurants in Walton Street who support it. The majority are against it.
Well, I'd like you to evidence that, John, because as far as we're aware, that's not at all the case. We know there are 1 or 2 who are very strongly opposed, and I won't go into the reasons for those, but we're not sure they're entirely benign. And there's several who are in favour, and then there's quite a few who are undecided. And I could name names, I don't know. But no. I can name one name. For instance, the Jew the Obscure is desperate to see pedestrianisation in that street. They think it would really boost their trade, help them in many ways. Mamma Mia is also, Jericho Cafe is also, and there are others. 101 Coffee, very keen to see it. So, you shouldn't necessarily believe what's being promoted and pushed by the Jericho Traders Association, which is actually led by very few people, and a lot of others are just going along with it because they like the idea.
Not convinced there's that much grassroots support in Jericho. I'm probably only aware of about 4 people who support it in Jericho.
Well, sure. I don't know why I need to persuade you, John. You attended our AGM. It was much better attended than this YouTube channel is. We couldn't even get everybody into that call because we exceeded our subscription. There was a huge level of interest. So I don't know why you're just picking things up.
Cynics might say they're all middle-class people from Walton Manor indulging in NIMBYism.
Well, I heard quite a bit of NIMBYism from Christopher Garland, I thought just now, who's a NIMBY in Jericho. And I've heard quite a bit of NIMBYism from you as well, John, about, your beautiful low traffic neighbourhood in Nelson Street and your right to drive. I heard actually, quite interestingly, if I could ask you a quick question, you've been spotted driving down to the barrier and back again. Well, we were interested to know why that was. Is that just to sort of find out if it's still there, or you got
No, to answer the question quickly, I go shopping. Next question. Meanwhile,
where do you go shopping?
Go shopping. Meanwhile, so
you're driving down to the barrier to go shopping.
Jamie, control yourself.
So sorry, where are you going shopping, John? You're driving from Nelson Street to the Green.
I'm parking in Jericho.
Oh, you're parking Lower Walton Street. So
yes, I'm parking South Walton Street. Correct.
You're increasing to the traffic in South Walton Street, so you can go shopping in Gloucester Green. That's
yes, indeed. Thank you. Now, you're just utopian, aren't you? I mean, you're taking advantage of a serendipity to impose a utopian scheme on the people of Jericho.
I'll take that one, Jamie, and I don't think that's a fair characterisation at all, John. I think I'd say 2 things in response to that. The first is clearly we've outlined practical steps to get to a full vision. We don't need to go to the full vision, which isn't utopian in any case, but we've pragmatically looked at this. We've commissioned a report, which is of course open to challenge and debate, and we acknowledge that this will go through a council process. Though I might also say that I think we're all pretty proud of how widely we've consulted, how thoroughly we've tried to reach out to people on this, given how limited our funding is and how limited the resourcing is. We look forward to council doing that even more diligently with the resources at their disposal and the fact that they're a far more formal organisation than we are. And the second is to the substance of our proposals, both the scheme C in our language, that being the modal filter, and the full pedestrianisation in the long term. It's simply not utopian. We've got examples of where this has worked elsewhere. We've got practical steps to get there. We can see elsewhere how this has resulted in a better neighbourhood, both in terms of footfall for retailers, for community space, and for a more equitable distribution of traffic. We don't agree with the characterisation of it. It is an entirely realistic investment in the future.
We're going to run out of time. Can you conceive of your a scheme without pedestrianisation, without blocking up Walton Street?
Well, of course it's possible. I mean, I think we'll get the scheme that we get. I mean, I think, we really, as Will says, I'd really, underline what he's saying is that I think we all really pretty much, most of us, really the lion's share of the people in this community want the same thing. We know what we want. We want reduced traffic. We want stronger community. We want a better environment. I think it's down to the council now to come up with with the best possible scheme, and it's a big challenge for them. But I really think we should be talking together, not being pitted against each other as one thing or another thing. We all want the same thing, and there can only be one scheme in the end. So we need to be talking to each other. And I'll repeat, I'm very pleased that we are in conversation with people in South Walton Street, and I'd encourage Hauke and Chris, to engage in those conversations, and let's see what we can do. Maybe more does need to be done in Walton Street, at the lower end of Walton Street, to make it work. I think.
So will you confirm that you are not the preferred scheme of the County Council, which seems to be a view?
I don't think we're the preferred scheme. I mean, all I would say is, we proposed a low traffic neighbourhood as a solution. We proposed pedestrianisation. And if you look at the EATF bid that went into the council, it is for a low traffic neighbourhood, and it does mention pedestrianisation of Walton Street. So in that sense, they have adopted our ideas, but I mean, now there are other ideas and they need to look at those ideas too. I mean, the important thing is to get the right scheme that it's about what we want. What is it we're trying to achieve here? Not the detail. And we know what we want to achieve, and let's all try and achieve it as one single community.
Okay, right. Now, my problem is I have to go somewhere, so does my man who controls the screens. So thank you both very much indeed. Just to say, next week we're going to look at the humanities building and the plans for that, and what they are, and what we'll give to Jericho, and whether they'll give a lot of money to the low traffic neighbourhood. But thank you very much. It's been lively and moved along. It's down now. It's up to you to decide what you want for Jericho. Don't let others impose.